How many of you feel that you have a connection with Mu, a land that many people say used to be in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? Ever since I came across a book by James Churchward about Mu, I felt such a deep connection with those ancient people. Then in 1997, Yellow Eagle of the Crow Nation did a ceremony with me, and he said, be still and meditative for the next 2 days after this eagle ceremony, because often very important things begin to happen. I was doing some artwork very quietly in my studio, and suddenly some words began to come to me, and the voice within me said, you better write these down. This is what became of those words that I wrote down. And I ask you to listen to the following as though an ancient Mu storyteller is telling you something that needed to be recorded and remembered because of what is happening in the world today. I'll be reading from the book, and it begins like this. The following is a parable about a mystical people who live differently than how we live now. Each of us has been various characters in this story. We have all traveled from a time of innocence in which we connected with everything through our thoughts and saw clearly how everything is connected by the maker of all things, or whatever you call that, which is in all things. We have each been those who began to think separately from the maker of all things, deciding that we could judge good from not good, and thus did not need to put maker of all things or goodness first in our thoughts anymore. We've all been fooled by the illusion of specialness, which would make us think that we are either superior or inferior to other people or other aspects of creation, whereas the Maker sees everything as equal parts of the whole. We have all had lessons in misusing our power or gifts for our own gain rather than for the highest good of all involved. There are some who continue to commune with the ancestors, ancient ones, Holy Spirit, masters, guardians, angels, or whatever you call them, and gain from the wisdom of all that has gone before. The message is usually the same. It often begins with, all is well. Put goodness first in your thoughts. Then, as you reconnect with the hub of the wheel, the place where all souls meet, you will be able to see from the divine mind, rather than from the fearful, limited human perception. How did we get so far off the path from our peaceful beginnings? This is a parable that shares the keys of how human consciousness strayed from the natural harmony. It is not easy to undo all that human society has gotten us used to. The pattern of our thoughts have deep grooves. Silence and simplicity are the first steps. Within silence, the ancient wisdom can return to all who are willing to listen through the heart. Empty the cup of what you think you know before we begin this story, and be willing to see anew. And listen to the story as though an ancient storyteller from Mu is sharing it with you. Our choice is simple. Do we choose peace or fear? Peace comes from returning to how the Maker of all things sees life. Fear comes from the separate seeing which the human mind created. Okay, the story begins with Kimayo, and in her language, her name meant record keeper of the sacred way. She was a young girl who was about to have a naming ceremony. And here's how the story begins. Kimayo awoke to the sound of thunder and of people screaming. However, it was not the thunder that comes with a rainstorm, and the people screaming was unusual since they had become silent now that they were on this island with the Sacred One. He had told them that through silence, the people could relearn how to communicate through thoughts rather than through their mouths. When one communicates through thought, there can be no lies, because all will know what is true by listening through the heart, he had told them. The earth rattled and rolled underneath Kimayo. Bits of branches and leaves tumbled upon her head. She stumbled out of her dwelling, wondering what had happened to her mother and grandmother. Today was supposed to be the time of her becoming a woman, when her mother and father would present her in a ceremony to her people. She had grown 12 full cycles of seasons. The thought had come from within her to go to the sacred cave. Since Sacred One was training them to listen to their inner guidance, she followed the message and moved toward the cave as best she could, while the earth was shaking underneath her. At the opening of the cave, a pile of rocks had shaken loose and now blocked the entrance. Kimayo's heart choked as she recognized her mother's arm outstretched from the pile of rock. She recognized the woven bracelet she had given to her mother. Confusion filled her thoughts as she also recognized what was in her mother's hand, the sacred feathers. The Sacred One had told the people that only he was to touch the sacred feathers, and if anyone else touched them, they would not only experience harm to themselves, but also to their family. Why was her mother at the sacred cave? Why was she holding the sacred feathers? Where was Sacred One, and why did he not have the feathers? Tears flooded down her cheeks as Kimayo knelt before her mother. Then a gentle hand touched her shoulder, and the thoughts of her grandmother said within her, "Take the feathers, my child. You are to keep them for our people. We must go now quickly, singing your mother back to the living light as we run to the dugouts waiting for us at the shore." The firm motion of her grandmother's hands made Kimayo follow, even though she did not want to leave her mother. Her grandmother paused for a moment and folded Kimayo's sleeping robe so that an inner pocket was formed. She had Kimayo place the feathers in that pocket. In the fog of numbness, Kimayo barely noticed how the earth was sinking to their left and right, leaving only a narrow bridge of land which allowed them to get to the shore. Once there, her grandmother lifted her into the dugout, which was being held by Laughing Wolf and Steady Turtle, the two guardians Sacred One had given to their family. Others pushed their way into the dugout as well, and then concentric circles of waves, caused by the earth's rocking, sent the dugout farther and farther away from the shore. Kimayo could feel the sacred feathers against her heart, where her grandmother had created a pocket. She knew that her grandmother's thoughts were to hide the feathers so that no one would be fearful that they were in this dugout and not with Sacred One. With her head cradled against her grandmother's chest, Kimayo did not look when everyone in the dugout cried out as the sacred mountain exploded. Great clouds of gray dust and wind and lightning began to expand outward from the explosion. Tree branches, leaves, and all manner of debris filled the air and landed on the water. Everyone bent low, covering their heads, as giant waves swept them up and down in a gray, chalky mist. "Grandmother," Kimayo said in her thoughts, "what is happening to our people and to the place where we live? Where are we going? And what has happened to my father?" "It is like the Sacred One said, Kimayo," her grandmother answered in her thoughts. "Do you not remember at the harvest moon gathering when he told us that a time would come when that which was land would become water and that which was water would become land? There were many who grumbled and said that the Sacred One must have had too much ceremonial drink, because such a thing could not surely happen. Somehow I knew that what he said was true." Her grandmother continued, "I just did not know the timing, nor did the Sacred One. When telling the story, the Sacred One looked directly into my eyes and my heart, knowing that I would understand his words. Then he nodded toward you and said that you were to be part of what was to happen. You will know what to do when it happens," his thoughts had said. And that was the end of our communication. "Why did the Sacred One not go and get the feathers himself?" asked Kimayo in her thoughts. "I do not know these things," her grandmother responded. "I just know that we are in a dugout now, and we will have to trust Maker of all things to lead us to the next place where our home will be." Kimayo wondered why she felt that her grandmother was not telling her everything. But then thoughts of fear took over. Did anyone bring food or water, she wondered, but decided not to look around the dugout for fear that she would not find any. She focused on the feathers at her chest and went into a deep sleep. Cloud Dancer of inner vision brought her to a large mound of dirt and rock with very steep steps and large serpents crawling all about. She felt herself being led up the steps in a stupor, and someone with a great feathered headdress was beckoning her to come near. She felt fear and yet peace at the same time. People around her had thoughts of how she was going to be honored in a ceremony, but their thoughts also held fear about some sort of sacrifice. "Thank you for saving us," she heard from their mouths, but did not understand. She remembered how Sacred One had warned her to beware of those who spoke one thing from their lips, but their heart said the opposite. That must be why she felt apprehensive, she thought, because their mouths spoke of praise, while their hearts spoke of danger. Kimayo felt that she must have been given a strong potion because her thoughts were foggy, and Cloud Dancer was whirling around with her feathers. "The sacred feathers," she gasped in horror. "How does this feathered one have the sacred feathers? Why am I here on this tall mound of dirt and rock?" She awakened in her grandmother's arms, shaking with a high fever. "Be still, my child," she heard from her grandmother's thoughts. "You have slept for 3 days in a fever. Are you able to eat?" "Grandmother, grandmother," Kimayo could barely form her thoughts. "We must not go to that place. People there cannot be trusted. Their hearts do not say the same thing as the words from their mouth. Do not take me there, grandmother, please. But she fell back into Cloud Dancer's arms and went back into a deep sleep. Her grandmother knew that this was the fever of inner work rather than that of being sick. The fever heightened her brain waves so that she could sense the inner realms more clearly. Many Stars, Kimayo's grandmother, fed her granddaughter the healing liquids which Wolf had placed in the dugout with a few other supplies. Many moons passed as the people attempted to survive in their dugouts. The winds and waves separated them from others. The ones trained in the sacred ways asked for guidance from the Maker of all things and for help from the elements. They attuned to become one with the Great Spirit which connects all things. If it be the will of the Maker, please bring us food and water, they would pray. When the rains came, they used the large leaves and other items which had blown into their dugout to gather fresh water and quench their thirst. When schools of fish swim around the dugout, they thanked the ones who turned on their sides and presented themselves as food. As Grandmother Many Stars gently fed her granddaughter, she prayed the many thanks for them both. The Sacred One taught us well, she thought, in how to become one with all of life and to trust that all would be given as we needed it. Sacred One taught us how to call the birds and fish and four-legged ones when food from Mother Earth became scarce. Knowing that we all are here so that life can continue to be, the various creatures which Maker made willingly present themselves so that the life force can continue to be in whatever becomes nourished by them. Many Stars also trusted that Maker of all things was caring for her granddaughter as Kimayo went in and out of deep periods of sleep. The times when Kimayo was awake were spent in nourishing her body with food and water or stretching her limbs in movement. I need to go back to the Ancient Ones for more teaching, she would say, and then drift off again in sleep and into a deep meditative state. It seemed like a full cycle of seasons had passed before the dugout with Kimayo, her grandmother, Wolf, and Turtle reached land. It was washed up near the shore, but the night was extra dark during the new moon. At daylight, all cheered with joy as they jumped out and pulled the dugout to the sandy shore. Grandmother Many Stars helped her granddaughter walk to the dry beach. A new moon, a time for new beginnings, came the thoughts of her grandmother as Kimayo gently breathed inward. The time of deep inner work was done, and Kimayo knew that her strength would soon return. With the Great Spirit's help, Kimayo thought, my father will also be guided to this distant land. Her prayers went out not only to her father, but also her mother, called Sparkling Water, in the land of light. She felt her mother's presence all during the journey across the great waters. Kimayo spoke with her in her thoughts as though she were still alive. So this is the end of section 1. And in section 2, we'll be hearing the perspective of Sparkling Water, who is Kimayo's mother, and in the ancient tongue, her name meant one whose innocent love heals naturally. And you'll see how she does that as the story progresses. So, why was Kimayo's mother, Sparkling Water, at the entrance of the sacred cave? Why did she have the sacred feathers in her hand? since only Sacred One was supposed to have those. How will sparkling water guide her family from the afterlife that they call the land of light? Part 2 will also tell Kimayo's father point of view and how Sacred One needed his help. And what is the powerful lesson that the sacred feathers teach each person who comes in contact with them? Each character will present a different perspective of what's going on. And so it is in life that each of us only has a piece of the puzzle. And that's one of the reasons why we need each other, to hear other pieces of the puzzle. In the comment section, I hope you will share your experiences or memories or thoughts about the land called Mu. Blessings to you all and peace. Namaste.